Hey guys, what's up? It's FilterSC here, and I'm back for a little bit of a video which is going to be what have I learned today. Now the purpose and the point of this video is I want to talk about skill ceilings and breaking through a wall. Breaking through a wall is one of the most difficult things you can do in StarCraft 2, and it can happen to you in basically any league that you're playing in. So we're going to talk about that, and we'll go through how to break the wall, as well as how to identify where you're at in your wall and all that kind of fun stuff. So let's get right on in it. Alright, so let's talk about what a wall and a skill ceiling is. Now, when you hit your wall, essentially what you're doing is you hit the peak of what you can play at. The way you're currently playing, the way you're learning the game, is only going to take you so far, right? You might get stuck in Gold League, you might get stuck in Platinum League, you might get stuck in Diamond. For me personally, I've been stuck in Platinum, I've been stuck in Diamond, I've very much so been stuck in Masters and unable to progress to kind of the next tier of Masters from low to mid to high, right? Like there's all sorts of different areas where you can get stuck. And what happens is when you do get stuck, you kind of hit your peak, you spend all your bonus pool, and then what happens is you start, you have a couple bad days and you drop a lot of ranking. And then that's when the game starts to get really frustrating. You feel like you're not improving. You feel like you've exhausted all the learning resources out there, and you feel like you can't get any better. And there's a number of reasons this happens, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as the video moves on. Now, the most important thing here is everybody has different walls that they're going to hit. Some of you guys might hit your wall in silver, some of you might hit your natural wall in gold or platinum. Some players will get all the way to Masters before they start hitting their own walls. And it really depends on how many bad habits you're picking up along the way, right? Somebody who just for whatever reason gets lucky, doesn't pick up really any bad habits, is going to immediately go up to Masters no problem, right? But if you're playing and you hit a couple people on ladder to do something really weird and it causes you to adjust your play in a certain way, and then you start to pick up these bad habits, and then what happens when you're playing is you can't really improve if you take your third base late every single game. You can't really improve if you're consistently doing something that is bad and detrimental to the way that you play, right? Now, when we start talking about natural skill ceiling, that's what I'm talking about, right? Your skill ceiling before you decide to actively crack it, you have a natural skill ceiling, and that can be anywhere from, bronze, silver, all the way up to, Masters, or maybe even there's a few guys that just zipped into GM, right? But eventually you're going to hit that skill ceiling. Now, the important thing to remember with StarCraft 2 is that skill ceiling is just, you can improve it and you can break through that. Absolutely, I won't say no problem, but with hard work you can break through it. Now, one of the best examples of this is Flash. Flash got to where he was through hard work. The guy was probably the best player in Brood War. There's obviously a debate and stuff like that, but we don't need to get into that. But Flash is a really, really good player, and he's an excellent example of the skill ceiling stuff that we're talking about, right? So when Flash initially burst onto the Brood War scene, Flash was a really cheesy player. He was, a lot of people hated him. He actually had a very bad reputation because he was knocking out fan favorites with cheese, which is a total polar opposite to where he is now, right? Now Flash went, okay, well I need to get better mechanically and all that, and Flash got to the point through hard work and practice that he went from being a very cheesy player to being mechanically so good at Brood War that basically nobody could beat him, right? And he would just out-mechanic people. It wasn't even an intelligence thing. He would do the same build, and they just could not beat him because they could not match his mechanics and his ability to macro, right? And Flash is kind of trying the same thing as StarCraft 2. I think StarCraft 2 is a little bit of a different game, so it doesn't work quite as well. But eventually Flash is going to, he's at a skill ceiling right now, and eventually he's going to learn that he has to adapt his play a little bit more towards the opponents that he's playing against, and he can't just recycle a really, really tight, refined build order. Because the smart players, like a good example is DRG, is going to find weaknesses and holes in his play, right? So it's up to Flash to kind of figure that out and break through his skill ceiling and make those adaptations. But he will, and I have faith that he will. Now, why do you hit this skill ceiling, and what happens when you're kind of crashing into your wall? The biggest reason is bad habits start to creep into your play. Now, bad habits can get formed for a variety of different reasons. They can range from poor control, poor micro, to not taking your third base on time. There's a ton of different bad habits, right? The vast majority of them, honestly though, are directly related to macro. Now, if you go look on all things Terran or all things Zerg, you're going to see a lot of players in Diamond that are struggling right now. That seems to be where a lot of players really start to crash into their wall. And they'll post replays, they're like, hey, I can't win this CVT, this matchup's too hard, you know, TVP is too hard, you know, Protoss players are like PVZ is too hard. And you know, they're just, it's not even complaining, it's just saying this matchup is difficult. But then when you go watch their replay, you're like, okay, well, I mean, you didn't take a 4th base against the Terran player, like it wasn't taken and it wasn't droned up properly, therefore you really didn't have the money that you needed to beat the Terran player. So yeah, it feels like Widow Mines are a little BS, but you weren't, your macro and stuff just wasn't there. It's not a micro problem, it's just you didn't have enough stuff, right? And these bad habits will creep into your play, and essentially what's happening to a lot of Zergs in ZVT is they're scared of all sorts of different things that Terran can do. So they play quote-unquote extra safe, but when you play really safe as Zerg and you're making a lot of units early to try and defend against attacks that aren't even necessarily coming, what ends up happening is your drone count suffers and you don't have the money, and rather than dying at, you know, an earlier time, you end up dying just a little bit slower, but you're never really in a position to win the game. And that's kind of what happens to a lot of players. They start to get these bad habits that get into their gameplay and kind of like a disease or something, just kind of sabotage them and don't give them the opportunity to win. You know, another really good example is in TVP. A lot of Terran players just get the wrong unit composition, and the reason they get the wrong unit composition is because they're ordering things wrong. They have, you know, their money's not balanced because their 3rd base isn't taken at a good time, and they're over defending against quote-unquote scary things that the Protoss player can do. And eventually you just end up in a late game scenario where the Protoss is warping into all of your bases, you can't defend at all. You try to fight their army head on and you lose because they forced you to take an engagement that you probably cannot win, because you have, like, you know, 7-8 Vikings and like maybe a Ghost against Templar and like 5 Colossus, right? Like you're just not going to win the fight. You can look at that engagement as being unfair in any way you want, but if you don't have the right composition against Protoss, you're not going to win the fight, right? So what you need to do is start pulling these bad habits and out of your game and kind of figuring out the best way to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section here. Alright, so let's talk about how do you break a wall. Now, when you go to break a wall, this is one of the hardest things you're ever going to do in the game of StarCraft 2. Breaking a wall is not a simple process. It is not a fast process. Sometimes when you're breaking a wall, you will lose games, you know, more often than you will win them, until you start to kind of swing things around, and then eventually you're going to start beating better and better players again. You're going to feel that sense of progression and improvement come back to your game, which is what the game's all about, right? Now, one of the biggest things about breaking a wall is you have to be ready to lose some games. You have to be ready to lose to a roach bust. You know, something that your quote-unquote old build would have held. If I was doing this, I would have held that no problem. Screw this, I'm going back to my old stuff. You can't use one game as an example of you know, your improvement. You can't use one game as an example to get better. You know, if we're looking at this on a broader scale, one of the best examples is people that are in business that kind of stay with the same thing over and over and over, right? If you're in business and you've been doing the same thing for 20 years because it quote-unquote works, but your business is slowly starting to die because everybody around you has adapted, you know, somebody like, let's say, Blockbuster, right? Everybody else is adapted and they're doing, you know, other things to try to get their customers in. And what you do is when you try to change and you try to, you know, adapt to what's happening around you, your old customers are going to get pissed off, right? And here's the thing. You can't really listen to your old customers because at the end of the day, what you're doing right now isn't working. It's very clear it's not working. But when your old customers are complaining because you're changing, you know, how you're going about things and how you're doing things, it's very easy to start listening to them and go back to your old habits and then continue to fail and eventually just lose. Same sort of thing in StarCraft 2, right? If you're trying to adapt to a new style of play and you're not quite familiar with how to hold certain attacks and scout them out and all that, whereas, you know, your old build where you got all these safety gaps would have held that attack very easily and you might have been able to win that game. What you don't realize is the other 4 games that you're playing that you lose, you know, the new style of play would have probably won those games because it is, you know, better overall, right? Like it's much better in terms of your economy, in terms of what units you get, and you know, that little roach play that killed you, you can hold that. You're going to learn how to hold that. You're going to learn how to deal with that kind of stuff, right? And it's important that you're ready to deal with that. So with that being said, you know, you need to find out what's holding you back. You need to figure out exactly like where your games are going wrong, and in order to do that, you want to look at the first 10 to 15 minutes of the games that you're struggling in, and even the games that you win. You want to find out like really what's going on. Like, am I taking my third base late? You know, is my worker production kind of poor? Am I low on units? Are my upgrades slow? Take a look at all that stuff. See what's going on. See why you're losing those games. You know, are you just not spending your money, right? Like, there's lots of things that can happen that are going to cause you to lose the game. And you really don't need to go any deeper than 15 minutes into the game, because time after that is basically, you know, the game's kind of opened up. In all honesty, like if you're playing in any league below the absolute top in GM and stuff like that, you should be able to end almost every game, you know, within 15 minutes, or at least have a very strong lead, and be in a position to win, right? And if you're not doing that, then clearly there's something wrong. You know, if you're in Gold League and you can't win a game in 15 minutes against your opponent, perhaps you're doing something wrong, right? And it's important to figure that out. So like, yeah, you might lose the engagement at 35 minutes, but it's really not that impactful to the overall game. So with that in mind, what you want to do is you want to retool your macro and the way you attack from the ground up, and you want to get rid of any technical stuff. You know, those builds that are really fancy with a lot of Hellions and Vikings and Ravens and that kind of stuff. You got to stay away from that, man. You got to keep it very simple, and you got to try to play kind of the same style as much as possible in every matchup, so you can kind of get used to it again, right? And it's really important that you kind of pull back on the really technical things until you're ready for them. You know, even using myself as an example, I've been doing a really technical ZBT build, but when I miss the macro that follows it up, the build is no longer any good, right? So it's important to kind of look at your play and be ready to take it on the chin and just reevaluate how you're playing completely, and work on your macro and how you attack. Now, the big thing with the macro is like you need to go find a really good pro build that hopefully has replays available or videos, like videos on demand of how to execute that build, so you can go out and see, like, you know, when are they attacking, like how are they attacking. You know, if you're a player in TVZ that complains about Mutalisks, chances are you're just not leaving your base in time to attack, right? And that can be twofold. Maybe your macro's poor. You know, if you do a 14 CC into like a really fast 3 CC play, you should be at like 140 supply and moving out of your base at about 11 minutes and 30 seconds. And most Zergs are not going to have mutas unless they do like a 2-base muta by that time. But if they do anything like that, you can just push out and kill them, because they won't be able to base trade you nearly as fast as you'll be able to kill everything they have, because they've just invested all their gas in mutas and they won't have any banelings, right? But if they play like standard, where the mutas come a little bit after that, you're going to be out on the map and you're going to be being aggressive already, which is important. So you need to figure out, you know, how often you're going to attack and all that, as well as your macro. Now, when we talk about macro, we talk about workers and units and all that stuff, but it's really important that your ordering of your buildings, when you take your gas and all that, it's very smooth. And you're constantly making units, you're constantly making workers, and you're getting your upgrades and all that stuff. Now, the other thing about macro that isn't talked about nearly as much is organizing your base and organizing your hotkeys so you don't fall apart when you get attacked. This is actually very important. One of the players that I've been coaching recently, when we do build orders, like if I just do a build with him, he can match me. He's in Gold League, by the way, and he can match me all the way through the whole build. Now, where he starts to really fall off and struggle is when, you know, a few lings do a run by, when he's not able to just land his third immediately, when he has to go out and kill an overlord or something. You know, everything just kind of falls apart. There's almost no SimCity, his units aren't hotkeyed, and they're all over the place, right? And you can't rely on that all-army hotkey all the time. You have to be able to pull units to different locations on the map to defend different things, right? And it's really important that when that drop comes, or Banshee comes or something, you can defend it and do your build at the same time. Even if you take some losses, that's okay. You know, some of those aggression builds are going to kill a few things, but you have to be able to recover without slowing yourself down, right? If you're still able to get your build out and your build's like 30 seconds late because of the harass your opponent's done to you, but at the same time, like his build is like 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes behind, you know, what a regular quote-unquote build would be. If you didn't do the harass, then you're way ahead, right? But at the same time, if you're, you know, if he's only marginally behind, but you're, you know, 3 or 4 minutes late with your start port, like you're gonna be in a lot of trouble. You know, if that mothership core harass really gets to you and throws off your whole build by like, you know, 30, 40 supply and stuff like that, then you're gonna be in a lot of trouble, right? So it's important that you're able to kind of maintain your building and keep going while you're under pressure, and that all applies to the macro side of things. Now, when you go to simplify your play, you really need to slow it down. One of the worst things you can do if you play is try to get all your all your units and your upgrades and get everything going really quickly. All too often, I'll see Terran players. I'll watch them on stream or I'll see replays, and they actually get their factory and their start point faster than they should. But what ends up happening is they don't have the right amount of workers, they don't have the right amount of units. So the fact they get their medevacs a little bit faster doesn't really matter. And even in some cases, they just won't even have the money to get the medevacs. So the fact that they got their factory and their start port really fast doesn't mean anything. Same sort of thing applies with upgrades. Sometimes you'll see players get upgrades really fast, but they don't have any units, so they can't really utilize a timing attack with their 2-2 because they don't have any units, right? Or even their 1-1, just they don't have any units, they can't do anything. So what you want to do is just refocus, and all you do is put together like just a small mental checklist, and all you do is you make workers, and then you make units, then you get upgrades and tech. If you do that in that order, so you're always making a worker, you never cut a worker, you're always making a unit, you never cut a unit, and then you get your upgrades and you get your other stuff after, you're actually going to find your play will get a lot stronger a lot faster, because you're going to it's going to feel weird to be doing things like this, but it helps your play a whole lot when you're playing very slowly and you're focusing on workers and then units and then upgrades. You're going to be in much better shape. And the other part about this is you want to play with 0 personal adjustments. Do not make any adjustments to the build orders you're doing. Like 0, nothing for safety. Do not do it. That's how you screw yourself. That's how you kind of wreck the whole program of trying to break a wall. If you start trying to make adjustments personally because you're like, well, I know Terran can attack me. If I'm a Zerg player, I know Terran can attack me at this time, so I'm just going to get a couple of spine crawlers and I'm going to make like 10 lings. That's okay, right? It's like, no, it's not. You're crushing your drone count, right? And not only that, you're crushing your drone count for the next minute, you're going to crush it for the next 2, 3, 4 minutes. So you cannot make personal adjustments. Please do not make any personal adjustments to the builds you see. Be prepared to figure out how to defend those attacks on your own by scouting them and seeing them coming, and do not make those personal adjustments. Those are what screw your builds. Those are the reason that you're stuck in Platinum. Yes, you're going to lose to some things that you don't see coming, but you cannot afford to be making personal adjustments. At the end of the day, Flash knows a hell of a lot more about the game than I do. DRG knows a lot more about the game than you do. So don't make those personal adjustments. At the end of the day, there's a reason that he is not defending against certain things, right? So it's really important to be prepared for that. And as I said earlier, be ready to lose games because you're not ready for certain things as they come. You have to be patient with it. You have to be ready to lose those games, and you have to be ready to figure out, what could you have seen, like how could you have seen that coming, and then how could you have prepared for it without damaging yourself too much, right? So be ready to lose those games, guys, because you know what? It's going to take a little bit of time. You're not going to break your wall overnight. It might take a week, it might take 2 weeks, it might take longer, but you have to be ready to lose. You have to be patient. You cannot make personal adjustments. Alright, so the next step, when you've got that figured out, you know what builds you're going to do, you know how you're going to do things, what you need to do is create a checklist for your replays. And how do you create a checklist? Well, you have the build order, you should know the build order, but you want to create a few areas where you can just quickly check your replay, or sometimes you can just check it on ggtracker.com if you upload your replays there, so you don't even have to go through the replay. But what you want to know is, like, how many workers should I have at X time? How many workers does this pro player have at this time? Okay, that's what I need. How many units does this pro player have at this time? Cool, excellent. That's what I need. And then, are your tech buildings going down without affecting your workers and units? So you want to check your tech timings, right? Like if you have the correct number of workers and you have the correct number of units, was your tech and your upgrades, were they down at the right time? That's your checklist. Just run through, cycle the checklist. Go over it every single replay. If your opponent does something really strange, then don't bother. If you get 6 pooled, and you're going 14 CC on the low ground and you lose, like, whatever, screw it. You don't need to check the checklist because you lost the game for whatever, because of some dumb build, right? If, the Protoss does a blink all in, yeah, chances are you're not going to hit all your benchmarks, right? Hopefully you can deal with the pressure and win the game, but in terms of a learning experience for that game, there's very little to be garnered in terms of your overall gameplay, right? When you play StarCraft 2, probably about half the games are going to be cheese or some kind of goofy all-in, maybe a little bit less depending on your league. maybe like 40%, and then the other 60% are going to be macro games, right? So the macro games are the ones you check for, all your different stuff, right? And then the cheese games you check to see, like, did I fall apart? Did I start banking a whole bunch of money? Did I get to where I need to be in my build? Did I eventually get to the right number of workers? Did I eventually get to the right number of units? Did I eventually get the tech I needed to win the game? Right? That's where you check on those cheese games or the goofy ones, right? But generally, when you're looking at your replays, you want to check, use your checklist, figure out, did I make the right number of workers? Did I make the right number of units? Are my tech buildings down at the right time? If you want to get really good at this, sometimes you can just play against a friend when you're trying to figure this out, and just get your friend not to cheat you. Pretty simple, right? But if you're doing it on ladder, same thing's going to apply. You're going to get cheesed a whole bunch. Don't worry about it. Hopefully you hold them. Hopefully you can learn from them, but don't put too much into it, and don't make adjustments because you got cheesed, please. Like, you just can't. And then take those macro games and just go through your checklist and see how you're doing. If you're making mistakes and you're missing your workers, you're missing your units and your replays, like, figure out exactly what's going on and why. Double check with the build, make sure you're doing it correctly, that kind of stuff, right? Alright, so now you've done all the work, you've done the hard part. You're just about ready to get to smashing ladder, and you know what's coming, you know how to do it. Now what you need to do is get to playing some games. And that's what we're going to focus on now. Now the first thing you want to do is you want to play each build out that you're going to do in each matchup via custom games until you can nail that consistently. That doesn't mean you get it once. That means that you can do it and you're going to get it 4 out of 5 times type of deal, right? When you feel really comfortable doing that build order, when you feel like it's just ingrained in your head and you're able to do it no problem at all. And we're talking custom games against the AI, so it's just simple, straightforward. You're hitting every single part. Your army's properly organized, your base is organized well, and you don't have to worry too much about micro and all that stuff. You're just focused on being able to nail the build and essentially put it into muscle memory, so that when you play the game, you don't have to think about it. You're doing everything correctly. Now, the reason that this is very important, and you don't want to skip this step, is what this does is it gets rid of quote-unquote personal adjustments. So what that means is you'll just go through and you'll mechanically execute a build without thinking about it, right? You're not going to be thinking like, what is my opponent doing? What is this? I'm scared of this. I'm going to build this. You don't do any of that. You're just building, going through and doing the build order until you can nail it every single time. And you should be extending it out basically until you max. Once you max out, cool, like take a note of the time and make sure you're consistent and trimming that down further and further, right? A really strong max out time for Terran is about 14 minutes. It's a little bit slower against Protoss because typically you're dealing more with like Vikings and a little bit more gas heavy stuff. Like Vikings and Ghosts and things like that. But generally, if you can get your max outs by about 14 minutes, you're in good shape. And that's what you want to do. You figure out your build orders and then go ahead and play them in custom games until you can nail them. And yeah, it's not the most exciting thing to do, but it's a really good way to start clearing up all those warts and those bad habits. And you're going to get a really good feel for each build order and how to play it. And it's really important to do this. If you skip this step, that's again where you're going to have a lot of trouble and where you're going to fail, right? Really simple, really straightforward. Just make sure you can nail it. When you're ready to nail it, then you're ready to move on to the next step. Now, the next step is you want to go ahead and play ladder. And then when you play ladder, you're going to play ladder like you're playing against an AI opponent. All you're focused on is nailing your build. Your build like as perfectly as you possibly can. So yes, you're going to scout, but all you're going to do is handle each situation as it comes up, and only when you see it. So a really good example of this is like you just don't play like you have any fear when you go out and you play ladder. And you just play like you're playing against the AI, and then you're going to clean up and you're going to crush because you're going to nail your build every single time. And then, if you start to get scared of something like a Banshee, or you start to get scared of start doing a big roach attack, you have to figure out why you're scared of it. Is it because you have no map control? Well, then go get some map control, right? It's really important that you only react to things when you see them. It's okay to die because you didn't scout a big, roach all in. It is not okay to make like 2 or 3 bunkers because you're scared of it. It is not okay to make like, 2 or 3 missile turrets because you're scared of an Oracle. It's okay if you go scout the Protoss when you scout his base and you see that he's not making a Stalker and he's not making a Mothership Core, and he's mined like 300 gas, because that means he's probably going for really fast Oracle on a proxy, right? That's a situation where you're like, okay, based on the information that I have, then I know that Oracle's a very strong possibility. It could be potentially DTs as well, so we're kind of crossing off two birds with one stone here. No problem, right? But it's important that you only handle situations when they come up as you see them. If you get to the Protoss base and everything looks like relatively normal, then, you know, don't overreact at home. Don't throw down those missile turrets. Don't do any of that stuff, right? Make sure you go and confirm everything your opponent's doing. If you're scared of something, go figure out, like, you know, whatever it is you're scared of. If you're playing Protoss and you're scared of like a mass roach play, you know, hallucinate a Phoenix, go figure it out. If you're playing against a Terran in your Protoss and you're scared of like a Widow Mine drop, you know, don't randomly throw down cannons all over the place. You know, use a hallucinated Phoenix and go scout. Right? It's really simple and straightforward. And you just have to play like your opponent is an AI. Don't be scared of them. You know, maybe try not to talk to them. Wish them good luck, have fun, and that's it. You know, if they start trying to have a conversation, just ignore it, right? And play the ladder like you're playing against an AI and you're just doing your build order. Because I promise you, if you execute a pro build at a very high level, in any league pretty much, you're going to win the game. If you execute it properly. Yes, there's some things that can kill you, but at the end of the day, the percentage of things that are going to kill you when you're doing that build are much lower than the games you're going to win if you execute really, really well. So you got to play ladder like you're not even playing against a real person, and it's really important to do that. And then what you want to do after that, as you're playing, you want to mentally note important timings from your checklist in the game, right? If you know you're supposed to have 100 supply at 10 minutes, how much supply do you have at 10 minutes? Is there a reason you have less? Like, did you lose like 6 Marines to a Stalker or 2? Okay, well then you have 94 supply. That's cool, no problem, right? And that'll give you a really good feel for how well you're executing and you know, are you going to be able to make your attacks and stuff like that work properly, right? Yeah, every now and then you're going to run up against a Smurf or somebody who's just better than you that crushes you. Not a big deal. But if you're playing really well and you're hitting the timings from your checklist and you can kind of see and figure out like whereabouts you're at in the game, because you just, you know, 10 minutes roll around, you're like, okay, I have this, things are going good. You're going to win a lot more games, right? And then the last two things really quickly, hold yourself to the standards you set beforehand. Don't make excuses for yourself. Don't be like, well, he pressured me, therefore it's okay that this was late. No, it's not. It's not okay. Hold yourself to the standards you set. If you do that, you're going to continue to get better and improve, because the farther out you set a goal, the closer you're going to get to it, right? If you set a low goal that is like, oh, I just want to win one game, it's easy to do, right? But if you set your goals, I want to get from gold to diamond in the next week, you know, you might only get to platinum, but at the end of the day, if you're holding yourself to the standards set beforehand, you're going to be in good shape, right? And that includes things like your workers and your units and all that stuff. You know what? At the end of the day, StarCraft's been out for a long time, guys. Players are getting really, really good. All across the board. You know, I was even watching BCQD stream, and he was talking about, you know, he would play Diamond players, and the Diamond players were challenging. You know, it wasn't like it was just a free win anymore, right? Like, the Diamond players knew what they were doing. And he was losing to Master players on a regular basis. And he's a very good GM Terran, and I highly recommend you check out his stream, by the way. But that's a different story. So just remember, hold yourself to the standards, guys. You're good enough to execute things at the level you're seeing executed at within pro games. You might not have the micro to necessarily do everything that's involved, but at the end of the day, when you're dealing with a simple build order, you should be able to execute that bad boy. No problem at all. Hold yourself to that standard and be aggressive with it. And the last thing we're going to talk about is ignore those losses where you get taken off course. You know, if the Protoss player proxy 2-gates you, the Zerg temples you, whatever, you know, a bunch of roaches come out, or the Terran does some like weird drop that's not supposed to happen, right? Like all this stuff that's just weird, and it takes you off course, ignore it, right? Don't check the benchmarks or anything, don't review the replay, like, you know, just move on. You know, mentally block, GG, mentally block that game out, right? The Protoss cheeses you with like, you know, I got hit by like 4 oracles at once one time, and it was like, what the hell is this? That's not a real build, right? And obviously I died to it because there was enough oracles to just kill my missile turrets. So it was like, alright, well, this is dumb. You got to ignore those losses and just move on to the next game. Keep your head clear, and move on. Now, anyway, guys, this is Filter SC. I'm gonna see you guys next time. This video is a lot longer than I really like making YouTube videos, but I felt like it was important to put this one together. So hopefully you watch the whole thing. Hopefully it gives you an idea of how to break a wall. I know it's a very long one. I know it's a complicated video, but this is the kind of stuff that will help you get over over yourself and get past the idea of you're only a Gold League player. You got to break those bad habits, man. You got to smash those bad habits. And you got to start working on your game and getting better, guys. The reason I did this video is twofold. Number one, I feel like a lot of players hit a wall and then they get frustrated and they stop playing, and I don't want that to happen. Number two, man, I hit a wall so hard that I think I broke my nose. I got to break through the wall, and this is the technique that I'm going to use This is the technique that I'm going to use to break the wall and hopefully get masters in the next couple of weeks. So we can, finally get started on the new Bronze to Master series, and I'm super pumped about it. I've been doing a lot of write-ups on it, but this is the video that I'm going to use myself and these techniques myself to get better and push myself to the next level, because I know I'm a better player than what I'm currently capped at, and I'm not going to put up with, just sitting at the top of Diamond. That's not good enough. I'm better than that. You're better than that. We can all do a lot better, guys. Anyway, this is FilterSC signing off. If you want to check out my stream, you can. So we're on twitch.tv/FilterSC. As always, follow me on Twitter. If you liked the video, you can hit the like button, you can subscribe. It doesn't really matter. And I will see you guys next time.